Porirua Air this morning, or this afternoon even. Today we've started the morning in Porirua visiting Whānau Manaki, a local kindergarten provider. We were able to talk about the Labour Party's plans to extend free early childhood education to 2-year-olds, something the National Party have said that they will take away if they are elected to government in this October's elections. We know that their past track record gives a pretty clear indication of what will happen to early childhood education under a national government. They underfund early childhood education, and that ultimately compromises the quality of kids' experiences in early childhood centres. We're also able to visit Kāinga Ora development here in Porirua, where we're seeing hundreds of new homes being built. And again, I note that the National Party have said that they want to take the knife to Kāinga Ora and potentially sack many of the people who are making those sorts of major developments possible up and down the country. We've been focused on refocusing Kāinga Ora away from selling off state houses to a provider who are building new public homes and who are working also to facilitate the entry of new private developments as well, of affordable homes, because we know that we need to build more homes. The fact that the National Party seem to be boasting that they're going to put more people out of work from Kāinga Ora suggests that they want to turn their back on that progress. It's now over 2 weeks since the National Party released their tax plans. They still haven't indicated to New Zealanders how they're going to make that stack up. This is a major credibility problem for the National Party. They've put forward a multi-billion-dollar tax cut plan. Their numbers simply don't add up. And the only conclusion that New Zealanders will be left with from that is that there will be significant cuts to public services in order to pay for tax cuts that right at the current point in the economic cycle are simply irresponsible and they are unaffordable. National says that they're not going to cut health and education. That's simply not credible when they have a multi-billion-dollar hole in their tax plans. There is no doubt that frontline public services would be cut. I noticed today they wanted to introduce some new immigration visas, for example, and yet they're proposing to make redundant a whole lot of the people at MB who process existing visas. Businesses will tell us that they want visas to be processed faster. National sacking all of the people who do that isn't going to help with that. Across the public service, you can find other examples of supposed backroom jobs that the National Party says that they want to cut that are ultimately going to leave New Zealanders worse off and not able to access public services that they rely on. If we take the National Emergency Management Agency, for example, which could see significant cuts under a national government, when we saw how important those agencies were when we had the flooding and when we had the cyclones. I don't think that cutting back on those things that we have been working hard as a country to build up over the last 5.5 years is what responsible government is about. These aren't minor cuts that the National Party are talking about. They're talking about putting thousands of people out of work right before Christmas, not just here in Wellington, but right the way across the country. I don't think that that's something that New Zealanders will relish the prospect of. Happy to open up for questions.
They're talking about cuts not just, well, they're actually not talking about cuts to frontline services. They're talking about what they call the bloated bureaucracy. I mean, looking across all the job growth since you've become the government, the Labour Party, can you at least admit things have got a little out of control in terms of your hiring of the public service?
If by the bureaucrats they mean people who are processing visa applications, people who are processing passport applications.
Like the Ministry of Business and the Ministry of Business, MB.
MB?
Yeah.
So the people who process visa applications work for MB?
Yeah, but they've had a headcount increase of more than 100% since you've taken over.
And including in immigration, where they're focused on processing visas faster.
But can you at least admit...
Though, do you agree that there is some fat there to trim?
We set out a plan earlier, a couple of weeks ago, that was focused on finding savings within the public sector, that was based on not filling vacancies, that was based on making sure that, there were the projects that had been delayed and haven't been started, some of those won't be started, so that we can find the savings we need to rebalance the government's books. The sorts of cuts that National are proposing go far deeper than that. These aren't superficial cuts they're talking about. They're going to be cutting right into the bone of our public services. Thousands of people losing their jobs before Christmas. Nicola Willis seems to think this is a good thing and has been boasting about it. I don't think that putting thousands of people out of work right before Christmas is something that any responsible incoming government should be aiming to do.
Isn't Labour promising 2% and National promising 6.5%?
That is a very significant difference. We're talking theirs is over and above what we've already committed to saving. So these are very deep cuts that they're talking about.
The statement says that For too long, victims of sexual violence have been re-traumatised and silenced by outdated laws. How long has this been in the works, and why is it in the carve-out area?
As I think everyone will understand, you can't do everything that you want to do in government all at once. This has been an ongoing program of work that we have had over the last 6 years, and these are just the latest steps in what's been a concerted effort to have a more victim-centric justice system. But I'll ask the Minister of Justice to provide more detail on that.
So the changes we've already made that have worked really well is that when a victim of sexual violence gives evidence in a courtroom, they can now use audio-visual, so they're not in a cross-examining situation. The other change is that now victims of sexual violence are not able to be questioned about their sexual history in terms of when they're being cross-examined. So there's some really good changes. We want to build on those changes by enabling a fresh look at consent. We know other countries have got a far more modern approach, and they frame it in a positive way. We think ours can be updated.
Could you consent laws and your promise to look at the stalking laws as well? These things could save lives. Why are you making them an election issue? Why couldn't you have done them when you had your majority?
We've taken a program of work. We've got 3 different pilots running, all focused on delivering better outcomes for victims. We've made significant changes by doubling the amount of resources provided to victim support and tripling the amount of funding to Victims Assistance Scheme. These latest announcements just add to a whole range of things that we are doing to put victims at the centre of our justice system.
Would you like to see some bipartisanship support for that, given, this will help you?
I would love to see that, yes.
I would note that one of the National Party's most common refrains when responding to any policy announcements that we're making in this campaign is, oh, well, we should have done it sooner. And yet I would note that they're proposing to sack all of the people that would do that. So the Ministry of Justice staff, for example, who are required to prepare the policy advice and the legislation to make these law changes, are the very sorts of people that could find their jobs on the chopping block if there's a change of government.
Well, actually, Luxon said yesterday, as far as the consent laws, that he'd be open to looking at it. So has there been any discussions across the aisle as far as their approach, or whether they'd be?
He hasn't approached me, but it's encouraging to hear that.
You haven't raised it with them at all?
No, there's been no discussion.
Just on a local issue for a colleague, lots of people in Porirua are worried about a possible closure of overnight accident and medical services at the Kenepuru Hospital. What's your message to them?
There's already been some intervention by the Minister of Health to ensure that that doesn't happen. I know the local MP's been engaging directly with the Minister of Health on that to make sure that that doesn't happen, so I'll hand over to her.
Kenepuru After Hours is absolutely staying open under a Labour government, and that's the bottom line.
Is the national candidate fear-mongering, as you've suggested?
Yes.
And what do you make of that style of politics?
I don't enjoy it because it basically increases the anxiety and the worries of our people in our city.
Yeah.
When did you find out about the possible closure of overnight accident services at Kenepuru?
So July the 12th, when as Associate Minister of Health, I had the Associate Minister of Health portfolio then, basically they were saying they were looking at a decision because of staff shortages, and then obviously speaking to the CEO of Te Whatu Ora, the Minister, both the Mayor, myself as the MP, the Minister, iwi all agree Kenepuru After Hours needs to stay open.
Just on the...
I said one of the major challenges that our health system faces is a workforce shortage. Just a couple of days ago, I set out a plan to increase the number of people that we're taking into our medical schools, our 2 existing medical schools. That will start from next year and will continue to ramp up over the next 4 years. I know the National Party's plan is to build a new medical school that wouldn't be admitting any students at all in the next term of Parliament. I don't think we can afford to wait that long. I'd also note that their medical school plan isn't fully funded, so there's a big question mark as to whether they could even deliver it.
Just on the class action. Oh, go ahead, Anna. Go for it.
ACT's welfare policy would remove benefits from drug-addicted and mentally ill people who don't seek support. They say that too many people on supported living payments who don't need to be. Do you agree with that?
I think, again, like a lot of things that we're seeing from prospective National Act government, they want to potentially make problems worse rather than better. So booting tenants out of public homes, removing benefits from some of our most vulnerable in the community. The fundamental question they need to ask is where are those people going to go? They're going to end up living in cars on the streets and potentially be more of a risk to the public safety of everybody else. I just think it's clickbait politics. It's not based on evidence. It's not actually going to work, and it's potentially going to leave the entire New Zealand community worse off.
Could you just elaborate on what you mean by clickbait politics? It's a new line from you.
Well, it's basically designed to get people to click on the headline, but the reality is if you read the whole of the article, you'll find there's very little substance.
Do you think there's a case to be made that there have been some people under Labour that have been on welfare for too long?
We're getting record numbers of people off benefits and into work. And again, this is another great example. The people who are doing that, the case officers working for work and income, are again the sorts of people who would find their jobs on the chopping block if there was a change of government in October. These are the people who are actually getting people off benefits and into work. These people often require support to get into sustainable employment. That's what we're providing them with.
Yeah, just to clarify though, do you think there is a case to be made that some people have been on welfare for too long under the Labor government?
Look, there is. Under any government, you will find people who have been on welfare for a long time.
Over and above any other government.
Under any government, you will find people who have been on welfare for some time. Getting them off benefits and into work requires intensive intervention, which is what we are working on. The National Party, again, these are the sorts of people, these are the sorts of jobs that would be at risk under a national government.
Just on National's immigration policy, what do you make of trying to attract more tech gurus into New Zealand?
It sounds a lot like their sort of millionaire investor category that they introduced, where I think only 1 or 2 people ever came into the country under it. Again, another clickbait policy. It might sound good on the surface, but in reality, I think they'd need to do more than that to attract those sorts of people to come to New Zealand.
Do we need these people in New Zealand?
Look, I think we're certainly keen to attract talent from around the world, but I'm not necessarily going to see Kiwi graduates being displaced from those sorts of jobs through a policy that really doesn't seem to have a lot of substance behind it.
And given Chris Luxon has made a big deal about opening up the foreign buyers tax to tech billionaires that want to buy property here, these people are going to get residence, so they're going to be exempt from the tax as well. Have they just made another hole in their plan?
Their plan has so many holes in it, it's got more holes than a block of Swiss cheese. The reality is it just doesn't stack up. The idea that they could sell $5 billion worth of Kiwi homes every year in order to stack up their tax cut plan is just beyond credible. They also have no idea what the cumulative effect of all of the plans that they are announcing is going to be on the housing market. So, they can't tell you whether house prices would go up or down, despite the fact that most economists are saying that National's approach to housing will force up house prices.
Just back to the Kindergarten Association. I mean, it struck me when one of the women up there said, thanks for keeping us safe during COVID. We don't actually hear much about Labor and its record on COVID. Is that because it's too far away in the rearview mirror, or your legacy on that is now toxic with New Zealanders?
I'm incredibly proud of the work that we did during the COVID-19 period. As a country, and this was not just government, but actually all New Zealanders contributed to this, as a country we should be proud of what we achieved during COVID-19. We had one of the lowest rates of death from COVID-19 of any country in the world. We had one of the highest rates of vaccination. There is a correlation between those two things. And I think that we should be proud of that as a country. Election campaigns fundamentally about what you want to do in the future, and so we're talking very much about that, but I am very proud of what we accomplished during COVID.
The Kindergarten Association, you talked about a lot of your policies and a lot of them got cheers and claps. The only one that didn't was your GST off your fruit and veg. What do you read into that? I
wouldn't read anything into that. It was in the middle of a long list of policies that I was working through.
Well, Grant Robertson hardly mentioned it at all at the finance minister or spokespeople debate last night. Is this a policy that you're no longer proud of?
No, we're very proud of it, and I've been talking about it every day this week.
What do you think?
Yes, Mikey. I didn't see it, sorry.
Oh, it's a bit sad to
I know that's terrible, and I apologise to Grant Robertson in advance, but I don't get a lot of time to sit down and watch telly at the moment. So
how much of today was about, obviously talking about your own policies, but communicating the risk of National's policies? I mean, you brought it up pretty much at every event that you've gone to today.
Because a change of government to a National Act New Zealand First government would be a huge risk for New Zealand. It would be a very unstable government, and the sorts of cuts that they are proposing would be incredibly damaging for New Zealand. Putting thousands of people out of job on purpose isn't a good way of running the economy. Cutting back on public services that New Zealanders rely on, even if they don't necessarily know what the effects of that would be, is a real risk at this election. And so, yes, of course we're going to talk about that.
Does that indicate that you, in terms of your strategy, think that it is more or just as effective to warn people about the other side as opposed to campaigning on your own policies? Does it indicate that you don't think that you can get as much cut through just talking about what you can do?
Elections are always about two things. What do we want to do? And what do we object to about the proposals of the other side? Every election campaign boils down to that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
down
Lloyd.
Please, because it's really weird. answer.
I was going to say, you look
down
very
there,
laid back
Lloyd.
down there, Lloyd.
You were
Yeah.
smiling just before.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting. There's 24,717 applicants on the social housing wait list. Are you building social houses quick enough?
We certainly need to build more, and we need to build them faster. We've been really ramping up the work that we've been doing around social house builds. So we've built 13,000 new social houses, or we've added 13,000 new social houses in the time that we're in government. We've got thousands of them under construction right now. We funded more in this budget, and we will have our own, housing policy for the forthcoming election that we'll be releasing shortly. We will see that we want to continue that momentum. I would put it to you, we're building more houses now than any New Zealand, more public houses now than any New Zealand government since the 1950s. If the last government had built houses at the rate that we are building them now, we would not have a waiting list.
How many people are in emergency housing at the moment?
Far too many.
What
Do
do
you
you
know
think?
off the top of your head? Have you got a number?
I haven't got the exact number, sorry.
Just
What
on
do you
the-
think about the conversation around a co-governance referendum? Do you think, given what we've seen in Australia, it could be a recipe for divisive politics?
I think it would be a meaningless referendum because ultimately co-governance means different things in different contexts. Would we really be saying that we would go back on treaty settlements that have co-governance built into them, for example? So I don't think it would be a meaningful referendum.
We've seen another story about the Ministry of Pacific People spending tens of thousands of dollars on a few breakfasts. I mean, are you happy? Well, not happy, but are you uncomfortable with seeing this sort of spending from government departments?
I disagree with your characterisation of it being a few breakfasts. There were about 700 people that attended post-budget events where we talked about the budget. I don't think it should only be rich business people who get to access ministers and get to hear about the budget after the fact. There have always been post-budget breakfasts and post-budget events. And the business community, for example, people pay hundreds of dollars to attend to those. I don't think that our Pacific communities should be excluded from being able to hear about the budget and speak to ministers and MPs about it because they can't afford to pay several $100s to go to an event.
But those events that the businesses put on, they're paid for by the businesses. This is paid for by taxpayers. You don't think it's a little excessive to spend all this money?
I don't think that an ability to pay should limit someone's access to hear about the budget and to participate in the democratic process.
There's nothing to impact from you, Barb, as well.
These are
At that expense at all.
No, these are held in community halls and churches, Mangere, Porirua, Hastings, which have heavy Pacific populations. In order for us to engage meaningfully and in a way that they're used to, which is face-to-face, I think it's absolutely fair that we go out to them. And those meetings aren't necessarily all one-sided. It's for the community to hold us to account as well and how they can access these funds.
I think it is another example of the fact that we would see under a national act, New Zealand First government, our Pacific communities used as a punching bag by those three parties. Good government is about bringing people together. It's about providing everybody with opportunities to learn about what government is doing, to participate in the democratic process. It's not about attacking people in the way that they have been.
What are some other examples?
How would you describe this week for you? It's been a big one, 2 big bad polls for Labour. How has it been?
Well, as I've said, there's only one poll that matters, and that's the poll that happens on election day. Polls go up, polls go down. Ultimately, the feeling that we're getting on the ground is a very good one. There's still 4 weeks to go, and we've got a lot to get out there and campaign for.
So that's the polls. What about you, your spirit? How is it feeling? Are you still? Is there a fighting spirit there? Surely it must get you down in some way. What's the vibe?
I'm really enjoying being on the campaign trail. You'll have seen me in the last, over the last week, getting out and about around the country, mostly in the South Island this week, meeting with people face to face, able to talk about what we're proposing at this election, and I'm really enjoying that.
Do you think you're spending
It's important when it comes to being able to hold your composure?
I think I have demonstrated in some very challenging circumstances that I can not only hold my composure, but I can lead the country through those challenges. I did that during the COVID-19 period, I did that during the floods and the cyclone, and I'll continue to do that with challenges in the future. I think that experience does matter.
Chris was trying to put himself down ahead of the first debate between the two of you, being like, oh, you're the one with all the experience. Do you believe him? Do you think he's just trying to stir some stuff up?
Look, he's desperately trying to spin around expectations. I mean, that kind of happens in politics. I expect that he's going to be a very formidable debater. I know that he's been getting a lot of coaching and has been spending a lot of time preparing for them. So I expect that he'll come out swinging.
He was a champion debater in school. What were you like at school?
I didn't actually do any debating until I arrived at Parliament.
Have you been doing a lot of prep for the debates?
Not as much as I probably should have.
Can I ask you about climate change? Is Labor going to have a climate change policy? Or
Yes, indeed, we will. Yeah.
Who's the Labor climate change spokesperson?
It'll be a combination of different portfolios because climate change, of course, cuts across a number of portfolios.
Does Labor have one, though? Or are you just
Megan Woods would be our main kind of point person on that. But, of course, we recognise we're in government. James Shaw is the Minister of Climate Change, and so from a government perspective, he still speaks for the government on that right up till election day. The Labor Party's policy will draw together the relevant spokespeople, but it's largely a combination of Megan Woods and David Parker.
So climate change is also right up there in terms of the concerns of Kiwis. We don't hear about it much on the campaign trail. Do you have concerns about what National is proposing? Because they put out quite a few climate policies, but Labor hasn't done that.
The National Party is proposing to wind back almost every initiative that we have put in place that have helped to turn New Zealand's emission curve downwards. They not only have a fiscal hole in their plans, they've got a massive carbon hole as well. So they say that they're committed to net zero by 2050, and yet they continue to promote policies that are actually going to increase our carbon emissions, take away the policies that are, or the things that we've put in place that are reducing our carbon emissions. And again, it's another area where their rhetoric just simply doesn't add up, and they have another major credibility problem.
Can I just come back to housing?
Yes.
Do you think the emergency housing contribution is fair?
In what regard?
The 25% of any income of those in emergency housing. Do you think they should pay that 25%?
I think there should certainly be a co-payment for people in emergency housing, yes.
Do you know how many have paid it and how many haven't since you introduced it in 2020?
I haven't got those numbers off the top of my head, but I'm happy to get them for you.
$60.5 million in arrears, that's how much people haven't paid. So what's the point in having it if people aren't?
Some of our most vulnerable communities, people who otherwise would be living in cars and on the streets, we want to get a roof over their head and we want to get them into more sustainable housing. Emergency housing is just that. It's emergency accommodation. We need to actually get them into housing that's going to be, or into living arrangements that are going to be more sustainable.
Which is exactly why I ask why you make it more punitive for them if they are the most vulnerable people in society, and then they've got to pay 25%. If they can't, then there's debt.
Everybody makes a contribution towards their accommodation costs.
You were talking this morning about how you would have liked to have done more as far as getting more access to driver's licence, people being able to get their driver's licence. And it was after MP to your right talked about how the changes this morning, they've been talked about for 18 months, something like that, a couple of years. When you, after the election, whichever way it goes, how will you honestly reflect on how you've been able to utilise the first single party majority?
Look, I think we have to. I think everybody will recognise that the last 6 years have been incredibly disruptive, and the global pandemic has sat right smack bang in the middle of that 6-year period, and that has meant that some of the things that we have been working on have taken longer than we would have liked. Driver's licensing is a good example. We have done a stock take of all of the different driver's licensing programs, but in terms of streamlining that work so that we're making sure that we're targeting those communities where we know driver's licence uptake isn't as high as we want it to be, we know we've got more work to do there. The work of government is never done, the last 6 years have been pretty challenging and pretty disruptive.
Forgot the Maori electorate debates begin next week.
Yes.
How important are the Maori electorates this campaign?
Well, the Labour Party is very proud of the representation, the strong representation that we have had in Maori electorates since they, for generations. And we'll be going out and campaigning vigorously in the Maori electorates. We've got a very strong slate of candidates standing in all of those seats. We hold most of them now, and we're aiming to keep them.
They're saying there's a lot to lose this election. What is that? On the line?
I think in terms of the progress we have made on issues affecting Māori, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whether it's in housing, whether it's in advancing treaty settlements, dealing with long-standing issues around natural resource management, all of that would be at risk if there was a change of government. It could potentially, a National Act New Zealand First government could potentially be the most anti-Māori government New Zealand has seen in a generation.
Prime Minister, can we get your reaction to the National Party's announcement today on technology? Would you like to have a Minister of Technology like the Nats have proposed?
Well, we've basically got I'm going to hand over to the relevant minister who is here with me today.
Could you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Ginny Anderson. I'm the Minister of the Digital Economy and Communications. And we also have a Minister responsible for science research in that area. So I would be really interested to know what this new proposed portfolio, where that would sit between the existing ones. And for a party that's pretty keen on cutting back on bureaucracy, it does seem like they're just creating a whole lot more.
Have you not been doing enough in your portfolio for them to go, well, let's create a special technology minister?
I think the $40 million rebate for the gaming development sector has gone down really well. It keeps jobs here in New Zealand and it grows a thriving industry that adds about $407 million a year to New Zealand's economy.
Prime Minister, they're also offering special visas for high wealth tech foreigners, residency visas for them. Does that undermine their foreign buyers tax?
Well, it certainly creates another hole in their foreign buyers tax, but ultimately that's one of many holes that they've got there. And I note too that whilst they're saying that they want to create a whole lot of new visa categories, which they seem to be announcing today, they're also saying that they want to sack most of the people responsible for processing visas.
Just to get in before Adam, you're going to be watching the league this weekend?
I am indeed, I believe. The last of the logistical arrangements are being made at the moment, but I'm hoping to be at the game.
So who are you going for?
What's that?
Who are you going for?
Well, who do you think? Up the wires.
If the Warriors make it.
What's that?
Score predictions?
No.
If the Warriors make it to the final, will you and Chris Luxon put the campaign aside and go and watch it out of bipartisanship?
Oh, well, let's no, I'm not jinxing anything.
We have a couple of questions about today's announcement. What analysis or advice have you received as far as how many cases this class action regime would swallow up, i.e. how much would it free the justice system up?
The report done by the Law Commission didn't go into that level of detail. What it did is draw up a framework of what would work in New Zealand, and particularly around making sure that it would be fit for purpose. We still need to undertake that consultation with the legal fraternity before we'd be prepared to introduce legislation.
What about the ABL stuff? What speed up would that provide?
I think it would make a huge speed up.
Do you have any advice or analysis to speak to that?
I can't give you a data breakdown, but what I can say is just one example is prisoners. We have AVL in all of our prisons, and it's quite a dangerous process sometimes to transport a prisoner to a courtroom for that court case, for that setting to be adjourned and then transported back. So in instances that's not a first appearance or sentencing, it would be a really good use of court time and safety to use AVL.
Right, so more about safety rather than time saved.
It's 100% safety is speeding up as well. We know a lot of time can be saved by using AVL, and I think if we need to use legislation to encourage the uptake of equipment that's already been installed, that's a good thing.
Just on those emergency housing contributions, Prime Minister, people have racked up a whole lot of debt. What happens if they can't pay it back or don't pay it back?
Look, that's a process that we work through. We have a debt to government process, and we've been doing quite a lot of work on debt to government as well. And one of the ministers who's been doing some of the analysis around that is with me now. It's not just about debt to government around emergency housing. We've got debt to government in a number of areas around MSD and so on. And we have been looking more holistically about some of our most vulnerable members of the community, the debts that they have to government, and how we can actually better support them to kind of break that cycle, if you like, that they find themselves in.
Last night, both James Shaw and David Seymour said ultimately the public isn't really going to care how National pays for tax cuts if they just want a tax cut. Are you losing the messaging around that if people ultimately do just want a tax cut?
I think National and ACT are treating New Zealanders with absolute contempt by proposing tax cuts that they know are not affordable and that they have no idea how they're going to pay for.
Cuddling cute babies is a pretty good reprieve after a big week.
I think I've been very passionate about early childhood education for a long period of time, and there's lots of fun that goes with that.
You're trying to use babies to get votes when you were literally pushing them in front of the camera.
I think that was that baby.
That baby was just fascinated by the cameras.
Blaming the babies now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Are you the baby whisperer? Because they quite liked you.
You can form your own judgment, Lloyd. All right, thanks everybody.
It was these fluffy microphones.